You're listening to A Little Too Quiet. It's the Ferndale Library podcast, and it's brought to you by the Friends of the Ferndale Library. And we like to have authors come on the podcast. We especially like to have local authors come on the podcast. Today we have musician Tony Muggs, but also now you could hyphenate musician/author Tony Muggs, because Tony just released, 6 months ago or so, released his autobiography, which is titled Autobiograffitti. So we will have information in the show notes about where you can find out more about that book, but it is the story of most of Tony's life. Now, Tony grew up on the east side of Detroit, loved music basically his entire life. And when he was 18, with his best friend, his literally lifelong best friend, Danny Methrick, they form a band, and Danny starts playing guitar and Tony starts playing bass. And then it eventually grows into a three-piece that is known as the Muggs. And the Muggs are right there in the mix of things at basically the turn of the millennium in the Detroit garage rock music scene, right alongside a lot of luminaries of that moment, like the Paybacks or the Dirt Bombs or the Detroit Cobras or the White Stripes. The Muggs were right there until one night, unfortunately, tragically, Tony suffered a hemorrhagic stroke, which left him completely paralyzed on his right side and, for a time, unable to speak. And though this is what's so interesting about the story, he wasn't informed of this at the time, but the prognosis was that he was not expected to survive. He spent 2 months in various hospitals due to complications with his condition, and he eventually landed at the Rehab Institute of Michigan in downtown Detroit. His recovery was speculative at best, and Tony says that basically the worst thing about his infirmary was that he could never play music again, or so he thought. And that's a lot about what this book winds up about, really, is thinking it might be the end, thinking your life as you know it might be over, but it isn't. It ain't over till it's over, per se. So this is a story for stroke survivors. It is a story of hope and inspiration, and it's also a story of friendship and family and support and community. And if I didn't say it already, I'll say it twice if I have to, a love of music. If you get anything from Tony Muggs, it's that he loves music. It is basically his reason to live, and it really did pull him out of that tragedy, which we're going to talk about today. And we're going to find out about the Muggs. We're going to find out more about that band. We're going to find out more about Danny as we talk about things. We're going to find out about Tony's more recent project, Dude, which is a project for his songwriting. And we're going to find out about so much more. So we have a musician/author. It is Tony Muggs on the podcast here, talking about his latest book. It's called Autobiograffitti. Here's our chat. Launch into this podcast. It's a podcast we call A Little Too Quiet. It's the Ferndale Library podcast, and it's brought to you by the Friends of the Ferndale Library. And my name is Jeff Milo, and I'm joined on the line by Tony Muggs, who is a musician, but now an author. Welcome to the podcast, Tony.
Hello. It's wonderful to be here.
Wow. So there's so much to get to. You've been a musician for years and years and years and years and years, but can you take us to the point somewhere around 2016, is it, where you say, I am going to start writing a book? Tell us about the biggest inspiration for writing Autobiograffitti.
Well, I thought it was a story that I needed to tell for myself, for cathartic reasons, but also to let other stroke survivors and other people that are in doubt of their abilities, that they can do it. We talked about this before. I know it sounds cliche, but all the simple truths in life are right there in front of us. So I wanted to write this book to give people a sense of hope in this climate of hyperinflation and climate change. And so as cheesy as it sounds, I wanted to do this. One of the reasons was to give people some hope.
Yeah, but a big portion, and I just felt compelled to start here, a big portion of the book that is equally inspirational is that I think it winds up slightly transcending just that story for stroke survivors, but also anyone who might just want to write their story can find inspiration by picking up the book and reading the book, because in a few ways, a big part of the book is you writing the book. It's kind of meta in this way. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it was an interesting way. I've never written a book before, but I fancy myself as a smart kid. And so one of my approaches when I was just trying to write, I'm just, mining for ore, if you will. I would treat myself in Hamtramck at Cafe 1923 or Bumbo's or Painted Lady or Outer Limits Lounge or any one of those places, home as well. Catch a Cafe, and I would just I would write on my iPhone for 3 to 4 hours. And then I would treat myself to the bar afterwards. And I just thought that was I need to be around people most of the time. That's just my process. I need to be in a room of chatter and just action all around me. And I'm in my own little world. And I just thought that would be a good way to start. So I started documenting the places I were at, and I was and I gave you every time I sat down to write in the book, I documented and I give you a sense of how I was feeling that day. Some days were rough, some days I didn't feel like writing. I wasn't inspired at all. But I know this is a process, and you have to push through those. Sometimes life isn't fair. Don't I know it? Right. But sometimes you have to push through those walls, and there's always something redeeming on the other side of that wall.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about what it was like finding your voice as a writer, your sort of your rhythm, your kind of your cadence, your writing voice, because that's it's kind of its own thing unto itself.
Yeah, well, that took me about 6 months down the line in the process of just writing week in and week out. I was a bit naive when I started this project. I was like, oh, I'll finish this in a year. Done. It's done in a year. Boy, was I wrong.
That's how long it usually takes to make albums.
Yeah, I don't know what I was thinking, but if nothing else, I don't lack confidence and naivete as well. And so it took me about 6 months to get my voice and, just to kind of develop the way I wanted to write it in a way that was candid enough. For instance, I love in movies, I love the concept of breaking the fourth wall. Mm-hmm. And in this book, it's called The Authorial Intrusion. It's basically breaking the fourth wall in a book instead of a movie. Mm-hmm. And I had to look it up because I knew it was probably a thing, but so I actually looked it up if it was a thing, and it turns out there's a definition. It's called the authorial intrusion, and I like doing that. So it's very personal in the sense that when I'm talking, and I use italics to indicate that a lot of the times. I'm either talking to myself or talking to you, the reader, directly, and I think it's a unique way, but I wasn't trying to be unique in the sense of I'm sure other authors have done this, but it was just a way of connecting with people and with, I was I always project myself into the future and get excited about who actually is going to be reading this. And it always, makes me happy and puts a smile on my face when I can talk to you directly so that's one of my processes that really inspired me and I found my voice through that.
It's also kind of just this familiar voice, that sort of familiar, like I could be sitting right next to you at the bar and you're telling me a story, kind of a vibe.
Yeah, I actually, if you read the prologue, I explain to the reader how I'd like them to read the book. Mm-hmm. And it was, and I actually described that, I say, imagine, if you will, that you walk into a bar and, any dive bar will do. And you sit down next to me and we strike up a conversation over some shots and beers. and we get to know each other, and I say dialogue with a new friend.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I want you to read it, and to see me. I don't think I'm. Let's face it. Everyone, I feel that everyone has a story to tell, and so I'm just one more guy with one more story that I thought was interesting enough to put down in a book. And I am tenacious when I always, if I say I'm going to do something, and I said to a lot of people, hey, I'm going to write a book. And maybe some people that don't know me, they're like, oh yeah, like, he's full of BS. But if I say I'm going to do something, I usually, commend myself to doing it. And because I want to be a man of my word. So, it took me 6 years in the making, mostly because of, COVID kind of, what am I trying to say? COVID, held the world up for a couple of years.
Right.
And go ahead.
No, I'm saying, yeah, that's right. It must have been, because obviously you're not going to be able to get into your routine. You can't really go to a coffee shop when it's quarantined. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah. So thankfully, when I started writing, I basically wrote the whole book before COVID hit. And then when COVID hit, I thought it would be a great idea to spend 7 months on a glossary. And I thought that the glossary would be fun insofar as there's a lot of, insider Detroit material that I'm throwing at you, a lot of bands that are just lost in the annals of Detroit history, rock and roll history, that'll never see the light of day, never get their due. And I felt, compelled to not only tell my story, but at least mention the bands that inspired me when I was coming up. Because I do describe, this is, first of all, the book Autobiographitti. If you're interested in it, there's a website, TonyMuggs.com, 2Gs, TonyMuggs.com. And you can hear a lot about my story, about me, and about my bands. But this is a story about me and my best friend Danny Muggs coming up on the Detroit music scene and all the bands that inspired us. So getting back to the glossary, I'm throwing, the Waxwings, Audra Kubat, Blair, Blair, he was a singer-songwriter, rest in peace. He died in the early aughts. But down the line, rock and roll, country, a little bit of jazz, a little bit of fusion, funk, the blues, obviously. There are so many bands, local bands that inspired me that I felt, a need to at least define them and give them their, proper dues. So, and on the other side, I like, jerking the reader around. I'm a funny guy, right? I'm a comedian and a musician in my own twisted mind. And so, I have fun defining certain words. So, for instance, in the prologue that I mentioned earlier, I say that any words that are any words or phrases that are italicized, I encourage you to look them up in the back of the book. I built a glossary, and so I had fun. Sometimes, the definition was just the definition, the Renaissance Center or Detroit, but or the Beatles. But I try to make it interesting insofar as, if I'm going to describe the Beatles, well, chances are everyone knows the Beatles. So I try to do a deep cut fun fact that you may not know about the Beatles. And other definitions, like I defined Satan. And that was fun because, I could just opine and, be a wisecrack and jerk. The United States of America, the same thing. It gave me an opportunity to opine a lot. And I'm pretty middle of the road. I'm not a Democrat or Republican, so I don't think I I offended anyone, or maybe I offended everyone equally. But it's all in good humor, and I'm trying to bring this. If you read my book and you read the glossary, I'm trying to unite this country. I'm sick of all the bickering and all the confirmation bias bubbles we're in, and dialogue is key to. And dialogue and understanding and empathy are the keys to unlocking this crazy, polarized political and just cultural, landscape that we're in right now.
Tell us about what it was like emotionally, I suppose, to write about the night, the hour, as you call it, when you did suffer your stroke, and returning to that and putting it on a page. What was that like for this book?
Ooh, that was tough.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, I did start off with it. And I did start off with writing about that because that is still one of my most powerful memories. And I can get really close to that. And sometimes it's like not dangerous, but I don't like getting close to it because it's ugly.
Yeah.
It's and it was hard for me, but it was necessary to walk myself through it. What can I say? I almost died. I didn't know it at the time, and thank God I didn't, because maybe I would have lost the will to fight. But my family thought I was a goner, but they didn't tell me, and I pulled through. And it's just seemed at the time I was going through my own soap opera. Everything seemed so heavy and foreboding, and it was just one. I'd start getting better, and then I'd have blood clots, and I got one in my lung, and I had to have emergency surgery because those can be fatal. But I couldn't be anticoagulated, which means I couldn't have blood thinners because I had an aneurysm in my brain. So there are all these, I just kept on getting knocked down. And then I had blood clots in my legs, and I was put through the ringer. So it was hard to face that again, and, to look at myself and, okay, I can walk around. I couldn't walk. I was completely paralyzed and I couldn't talk. Well, I can talk again. But there are certain things that I still haven't achieved, like mobility in my right hand. That's why I play the bass on a Fender Rhodes piano, because I lost the ability to play the bass guitar, because that requires two hands. So it was tough. But on the flip side of that, it was such a joy to remember the hilarious stories, with my mom. And I'm so grateful for that, just walking myself through those memories brought me close to my mom again, who I lost in 2015. Yeah. So, I'm very grateful for that.
And your stepdad too is a key character too.
Oh yeah, Gary. He's the salt of the earth. He still lives in St. Clair Shores, in Mom and Gary's house. And I talk to him, often, and he, I can never repay a certain amount of people like Danny Muggs and my stepdad Gary, who doubles as my dad. And my brother Frank and my mom and Gary. After I got out of the woods, in a manner of speaking, I was getting better. And I had two things in front of me. I had rehab, and I dedicated myself to that 110% in music, and same 110%. After a couple of years, they if they were, I don't even know if this is fair or not to say, but they could have said, if they were different people, they could have said, all right, Tony, well, rent, you can't live here for free anymore. You gotta, get a job and you gotta contribute. But they saw my passion for music and my passion to get better, and they just let me figure my life out. And I got my ass kicked, and I almost lost my life. And they weren't pressuring me with a time limit. Okay, it's 2 years. After 2 years, you gotta They just let me figure it out, and I'll always thank them from the bottom of my heart, because that's true love.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
it's it's also a note for the reader. If you're a reader who has not suffered a stroke, but God forbid someone in your circle does, it's this reminder, this grace note to be tender with them and support them. It's huge. Talk about the music a little bit more, though. I mean, it is hard to get that down. It is hard to get those experiences and those memories, especially that one memory, down, because it was so tragic and so traumatizing. And reliving that, I'm sure, was not fun. It is worthwhile, though, in the end, because this book is all about the hope. But it must have been fun also just to read about music.
Oh, it was so, man. I always say I've lived a fairy tale of a life. And when Danny Muggs and I started playing music, we were about 18 years old, and we were about 20 years old when we started taking it serious. And we wanted to get into a band together, and we were always a team, which was so helpful. And I take that for granted now, that we were always a team, and it was exciting. It was exciting to have a bandmate who inspired me. Danny was such a prolific, arguably he's one of the top 50 guitar players in Detroit of all time.
Oh, yeah.
And don't even get me started on his songwriting. 6 albums of nothing but wonderful blues rock material, and he's a wonderful songwriter. And just when we started at 20 years old and we were in bands, there's this sense that we were destined to do something great, and I think that we believed it. There's nothing that's indicated that. We just believed it so much. And Danny, believe it or not, he was soloing within 6 months, and he persuaded me to go to the bass guitar, which changed the course of my life, literally. I don't think my career as a musician would be anywhere post stroke without me changing to bass guitar. And then just so happened that I'm paralyzed on my right side, but the bass clef on a piano is on the left, so everything just worked out like as if it were scripted. So just coming up, always being in 2 bands. We always had an original rock band, and we always had a blues band. And we always played together, and we always bounced ideas off each other, and it was very inspiring. And around 1999, we were in this band called Fat Billy Brown, original rock band, and it just wasn't going where we expected it to go. And so Danny had this idea of him lead singing, because at the time I was a lead singer, and he wanted to do something more, more in the vein of the blues and rock. So, low hanging fruit, like your Led Zeppelin, your Jimi Hendrix, but all original. So it was just, the natural progression. We were getting really good on our instruments, and by that time I was just understanding all the nuances of like a player like John Paul Jones, or Greg Ridley from Humble Pie, or James Jamerson from Motown. And I was just, we were just climbing that rung on the maturing. And by the time we were like 26, 27, we formed the Mugs, and then about a year and a half later, I had a stroke. Screwed it all up.
And that's the worst part. There was all this momentum and all this energy.
Oh man, Jeff, there was so much momentum.
Yeah. And it's like, also, this is like for Detroit music nerds, it's like you're at the peak of Detroit garage rock scene. It's like, that's like peak White Stripes era, oh 01,
Yeah.
oh 02. So
Oh, it was heartbreaking. And the most heartbreaking thing about it is when the dust had settled, I bounced around a couple of hospitals, but when I got stabilized, I was at RIM, which stands for Rehabilitation Institute of Michigan. And it's only like 2 blocks away from the Magic Stick and a Garden Bowl. And it was just like fate was just like, no, it was just like torturing me.
Yeah.
I was so close to, I was just hanging out there a couple of weeks ago, and now I'm like fighting for my life. Life is not fair, is it?
You know, stroke is a scary word just by itself. When anyone hears any kind of story, they get, it's a very disquieting experience. Like, oh man, that just sounds horrible, and like it is. It's like it's as though having a stroke is like this vacuum of hope. That is like the moment where I would worry that a lot of people would say, oh, well, my life as I know it is over. And that's like a very down, hopeless sentiment.
Yeah. I try not to hate anything, but
yeah,
I hate the word stroke. And
yeah,
when I hear, somebody say, oh, he had a stroke, I go into my analytical mode and I'm like, okay, was it a ischemic stroke or was it an aneurysm?
right.
And every stroke is different, but every stroke is a disaster.
Right.
And you're talking about, even best case scenario, months of rehabilitation. And it just screws your whole life up. You get, now you're in the system of applying for, Medicaid and Medicare and disability, and and you're just in line, you're a number, and there's so much red tape. I speak about that in my book, about Medicaid, and I know it's an impossible system, and I don't have the answers. I'm a musician. I can just write songs about this and complain about it. But we hire politicians to figure it out, and unfortunately, they're not interested in helping us out these days. But that's altogether another topic of conversation.
The thing about holding this book in your hand is that it's, it can be so easy to lose hope or to become hopeless. And this book is, we're going to get into this in the next question, but like this book is the author saying, I've made it to this other side. Like I have, we can kind of spoil this ending and say that, you go on to get back with the Mugs, you go on to start Dude, which is another project, you go on to continue playing music. So there is this sort of happy ending calling back toward that hopeless period, and it's giving the reader hope. But then we can also kind of talk about how this book is part one in and of itself. It kind of like takes us up to 2003. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. We have a mutual friend, Josh Mallerman, and I think we've talked about this before. Josh took some cursory interest in my book when I was talking about writing it, and he would just chime in every once in a while. Hey, how's it going? How's the book? We could talk, and the reason I chopped it into 2 books was I asked Josh, well, I've never written a book before. How long should a book be? And he thought, his explanation was, normally between 60 and 80,000 words.
Right.
And I was looking at my word count on my computer, and it was at 95,000 words. And I said, Josh, I'm not even halfway done. So, I'll use this analogy. So for any Star Wars fan, the original, 77, 80, and 83, the original Star Wars saga. Autobiographitti is kind of like A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. All the drama, I'm getting my ass kicked. But the second book, I don't even know what I'm going to call it yet. It's going to be a celebration of, I'm going to start the book off, so I end this book in 2003 when I go to California to do some alternative therapy. The hyperbaric oxygen chamber therapy. Um, and so I figured that was a wonderful way to end it, because during that period, 6 months period of my life, I borrowed a keyboard from my Aunt Marie, and I started transcribing and basically teaching myself how to play the keyboard as a bass guitar. And of course, I asked Danny for his, not permission, but I just wanted his blessing. This, I don't know if this has been done before or not. And, I'm just saying I love music so much. I'm willing to learn a whole new instrument to get back with the Mugs. But the Mugs, this is some serious songwriting. And, I always say you can't bullshit a 3-piece. So, I had to do my homework, and it was all, every day for 3-4 hours a day for like 4 or 5 months to get just a cursory knowledge of my new instrument. So I figured that would be a great way to start the second book, me, becoming the Jedi, and then all the hilarious stories, when, from there, the Mugs really took off. And in the first book, I talk about the Mugs being on national television. The Next Great American Band was a TV show. It was an American Idol spinoff in 2007. And so I touch on that in the first book, but then I leave you at a cliffhanger. So I'm gonna revisit that, and then talk about the Mugs touring in Europe, and it's kind of like a celebration, high fives, hilarious stories from the road, and then I'm gonna bookend it with some thoughts. I'm actually gonna end the second book, riding up to Bumble is where I start the first book, and that's where, reading the prologue in the first book, I talk about how I was going to Bumble for my birthday in 2016. I'm a December baby, so almost 2017, and I ran into a good buddy of mine. You might know him, Jamie Mosshart.
Yeah.
So that tall drink of water. He was working at Third Man Records at the time, and I was, just saying, oh, how cool would it be to have Dude be signed to Third Man, and we just stumbled into this conversation about writing books, and I said, yeah, I'm trying to write a book, and he's like, what? And his ears perked up, and he said, they publish books, so that to me is you're in. That if you're serious about doing this. So that was the impetus, bringing it back to Detroit. Third Man and Jamie Moss are just encouraging me to actually write the book. And so, I took it seriously, and I finally sat myself down and completed it. And I told everyone that I was doing it. So I had to do it,
Holding yourself accountable by telling people.
Exactly. That's one of my methods. It's just my method. I'm sure it doesn't work for everyone, but if I'm gonna go stick my neck on and say I'm doing something, and the more people I talk about it, now I have to do it. I have to hold myself accountable. So that's just my method.
Well, so I'm going to have links in the show notes for people to find the book. But since this is premiering, people are hearing this, folks at home, it's July 15th when you're hearing this. I think there's some Mugs news. Don't you guys have a show coming up pretty soon?
Yeah, our first show in almost a year. We're going to be playing on Friday, August 4th at Outer Limits Lounge in Hamtramck.
Excellent.
With a really, really cool blues rock band called Sugar Tradition, and a really cool rock band. One of my best friends, Michael Bryan, he's the singer-songwriter in the band Clearfields. Mm-hmm. And, it's 18 and over too. And it's going to be, I think, $12 at the door. Doors are at 8. Music should be on by 9. And we're anticipating a good crowd because we haven't played in almost a year. So I can't wait to get back up on stage with Danny. And we're doing some deep cuts too. So it's going to be a fun show.
Nice. And then of course there's Dude, which is a project that's ongoing. And you guys just had some new music out as well. We'll have links to find more about Dude too. And I love Dude. It's the Mugs I've always seen as the blues side, but I always see Dude as kind of your more melodic kind of big star kind of vibe. I really like that, the Beatles kind of side of you.
Absolutely. I've been writing songs ever since I could put two chords together. There's always something Beatlesque or the Beach Boys or Big Star. I just love melody and I love harmony.
Yeah.
And can we should talk about. I just released my second Dude album, which is the same title as the book, Autobiographitti.
There's Autobiographitti the book, and then Dude has Autobiographitti the album. Yeah.
Yep. I can never do anything easy. And that's one of the reasons it took 6 years to complete the project. I had actually finished the album. It was all ready to go besides the artwork in March of 2020. Mm-hmm. And then COVID hit. And so I figured that was the universe telling me to put my music down. And of course, I wasn't going to release anything during the time of COVID. So that gave me an excuse to, write the glossary in my book and really knuckle down and edit. I must have edited it, 20 times or more. And then I brought other people in to read it, and it was a process. So by the time, COVID was clearing up, and I always wanted to release the album and the book together. However, my bandmate Danny Muggs thought it would be cool to release the book first, and then maybe 3 or 4 months down the line release the album, because he read a book called Dear Theo, and it was a compilation of letters addressed to Vincent van Gogh. Was writing all these letters to his brother Theo, and so there's a book called Dear Theo out. And long story short, Danny said after he read that book, it was so insightful in getting inside Vincent van Gogh, the man, that it just changed his worldview about his paintings too. It made it that much more. So he said, you might want to consider releasing the book first, so that they can readers can see your passion for music and your passion for life, and you've overcome so much, and that in turn might make the music more potent. And so I took a page off of Danny's playbook, and it was just as scripted. I released the book in December 1st of 2022, and I just released the album on April 15th of 2023. So life is good.
Heck yeah. Yeah, and there's a little bit about the album at the very end of the book, kind of squeezed in right before the glossary. It talks about the album, doesn't it?
Yeah, I wanted to shine a spotlight on everyone that's helped me, because honestly, I can imagine anything these days, but I can't do it on my own. So I rely on so many wonderful players around town to get inside my head and breathe life into these songs. And so I wanted to put a spotlight on everyone that helped me out, from Michael Bryan, to Carl Condrat, to Matt Hammond, to Todd Glass, Jared Champion, Stephen Garcia, Charlie Palazzola, Jimmy Dixon. Those were, most of the main players that just made this album outstanding. I'm just so lucky that they want to work with me, and I'm so very happy and pleased. I'm going to be tracking the third album pretty soon. I'm calling the third album, the third Dude album, Destroy It, and it's going to be fun. So I'm getting all my ducks in a row. I'm going to be leaning on Todd Glass and Matt Hammond again, and of course Stephen Garcia, to just start the process over. And love a challenge, and this is going to be another challenge for me.
If I take anything away from your book, it's believe in yourself. I know, you know what I mean. I mean, I know we talk about cheesiness and cliches, but they're there for a reason. Like, just keep going. And
yeah, it's life is a journey. Yeah. And you're missing the point if you don't recognize that. And this release, the book and the album were important, and that defined 6 years of my life, and I'm grateful for that. But I'm going to promote it, and hopefully I can climb the rung on the national ladder of recognition for my book or my album. But in the meantime, I'm not waiting around for any, sitting on my hands waiting for somebody to pat me on the back.
Sure.
I'm going to write, I've already written my third album and my fourth album. I'll be tracking my third album pretty soon. Eventually in the next year or so, I'm going to start writing again, and for my second book, and lots of irons in the fire that I can't divulge right now, but you never know. I like I say in the book, I don't have to be the best. I just want to be in the conversation. I just want to be in the mix of creative people, and I'm one of literally hundreds of creatives in the city, and I'm just proud to be a contemporary, and with so much talent around me.
Right on. Well, Tony, thanks so much for coming on the podcast and chatting with me, man. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
I really love what you're doing, and how you support the community. It's beautiful, man.
Yeah. Man, I was going to say, all those musicians who have been helping you record that last album, they believe in you. I was saying, believe in yourself, but they believe in you. And that's what it comes down to, is just you grow a community that way by just working together. So there's that element to it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess I don't stink after. I just smell a little funny.
Well, as I said, we'll have more information in the show notes about where you can find and purchase Autobiograffitti, and find music by Dude as well as music of the Mugs. You've listened to another episode of A Little Too Quiet. It's the Ferndale Library Podcast, and it's brought to you by the Friends of the Ferndale Library. Remember to rate, review, subscribe, or leave a positive review. It would help us find more listeners, and we'll be back next week with more. Thanks for listening.